This is Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media, and the community is South Bend in Notre Dame, Indiana. However, I am in the Philippines, and if you take a look, I have a Gideon's International shirt on. That's because I joined the Gideons 39 years ago in order to get into the jail ministry in South Bend. And eventually I became the assistant chaplain to Father Logan, and I became the chaplain down there. And that was through the Gideons. But I also took a court case to the Supreme Court, and the main argument was based on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I said I got fired for being guilty of bringing a Bible into the classroom, which I only read to myself. And that was established in the court. But the Supreme Court upheld the decision that a teacher reading the Bible in front of the children is a violation of the children's First Amendment rights. However, here in the Philippines, I've been joining the Gideons, and I've gone many times into many schools, thousands of children, invited in, supported fully by the government, wanting us to come in. It seems. Tomorrow we got another school, 3,000 children. I'll be joining. My wife will join me for the first time. And these children are very eager, and they are amazingly receptive to somebody like me. The last time one boy, probably about 8th grade, he just came up to me wide-eyed saying, "I'm the first American he's ever met," which is amazing because half the shirts that people are wearing, they contain an American logo of some kind, typically California, Los Angeles, but it could be anything. You see the number 23 like everywhere, Michael Jordan. I mean, so they are thoroughly Americanized. Most of the younger people speak English. When you go into the classroom, we have both. The Cebuano, that's the Bisaya, that's the language here in Cebu, or we have the English. We have, which one do you want? It seems like they usually want the English translation of the Bible. So that's pretty amazing. The Philippines is significant to me a little bit. When Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese, that same day they attacked the Philippines. And in my uncle, who went to Annapolis, was an officer of a ship at the time of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And a cousin in the mid-'60s at a private school did a research paper on our common uncle and the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And he concluded that it was a complete setup by Roosevelt, which of course it was. But the American people, we can look at the JFK tapes, but are we ever going to be honest about Pearl Harbor and the reasons that we thoroughly provoked the Japanese? The idea was in our mind, not their mind. And the reason was that we were full of communists in our government, and those communist sympathizers wanted to help Stalin defeat Hitler. The only way was to provoke the Japanese, and it worked. Hitler had to declare war on us, which he did, and we're in the war. We were already in the war by Lend-Lease. Okay, now these things are happening, and the American people are not allowed to acknowledge this basically anywhere. It's not going to be acknowledged at universities. It's not going to be acknowledged on the media. It's not going to be acknowledged in the schools. And by the time it's acknowledged, the damage is already done. But Henry Hopkins coincides with, John Henry Hopkins coincides with Henry Brownson, and sometimes I get them mixed up, so don't be surprised. This talk is going to be the first in a series of talks on this speech by Henry Brownson, the son of the famous Orestes Brownson. Orestes Brownson's buried at the crypt, the Basilica at Notre Dame, and Orestes Brownson was considered by many Europeans to be one of the top two best thinkers in America of the 19th century. Orestes had a brilliant intellectual career, and Henry, his fourth son, was the one that seemed to work with him the most, to write with him the most, and to know the most about his dad. And this is a talk given at Notre Dame in light of the fact that Henry received the Laetare Medal, as means the best Catholic of the year, by Notre Dame, which really doesn't mean anything because some of the people they give it to today is astonishing. But back then, apparently, they were giving it to the right people because he quite well deserved it. When Black Lives Matter was going strong, if you go into the administration building, they have huge portraits of Christopher Columbus. Well, apparently Notre Dame had to take them down because of pressure from Black Lives Matter. And Henry Brownson, part of the reason he was given the Laetare Medal is that he translated a huge book on Christopher Columbus by an Italian. And it was a massive project. And Henry Brownson obviously chose that because he considered Christopher Columbus to be central to America. You call it the District of Columbia. That's the feminine for Columbus. So everywhere you go, Columbus, and at the same time, we want to tear him down and tear down anything that's Christian, basically. So the French Revolution continues in this country. Henry Brownson was sent to Paris at age 15, where he learned French, obviously, went to Munich, learned German. If you read his obituary, it says he was proficient in Hebrew, Greek, and many other languages. In 1860, he went to France for a year, and then the Civil War starts. He comes back. He had been studying law, and he joins the military. He attains a rank of captain. He's wounded twice. He's wounded at Chancellorsville, where he's actually fighting Stonewall Jackson himself. That was the Battle of Jackson. It was his probably greatest victory against, you hear stories of like 3-to-1 odds, but Brownson was wounded, taken prisoner, and went to Libby, the famous Libby prison, and then there was a prisoner exchange or something. Then he goes on to stay in the military till about 1860, then he practices law. And because of his injuries, he just gave himself to study. And when he died in Detroit, the headlines were, he was like front headlines of the paper. Greatest thinker of Detroit and the best library in Detroit, things like that. So he's an unknown gem. You can't find him. You're not going to find him on Wikipedia. You're not going to find him unless you search, which is normally the truth. The best things are hidden. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings to search it out. The things that are popular are usually very problematic in today's world. Okay, the title of this speech, and we're only going to get into a little bit because it's so in-depth, and I have to make commentary on so many things. It's called Equality and Democracy. It says, a speech given at Notre Dame in 1897. The full title is Equality of Property, Social Condition, and Power under a Popular Form of Government, given at Notre Dame, 1897. He starts out. European revolutionists, or as they choose to say, liberals, claim that they are only struggling with varied success to establish in their respective countries the principles which the American Congress of 1776 proclaimed to the world as the ground on which they justified their Declaration of Independence and to make them the basis of the new nations they were founding. Thinking of Brownson. And Brownson is a name that I grew up in. My dad went to Notre Dame and lived in Brownson Hall, and he always would go to the Navy Notre Dame games. So he, for some reason, was always bringing up Brownson Hall at the youngest age. I have a lot of photos when I'm at Notre Dame, age 5. My dad would take me there. Of course, I eventually go to Notre Dame because that was the trajectory that my family had me on. But Brownson is similar to Robert Louis Dabney. I think Dabney's probably the best thinker of the 19th century. But their views amazingly converge. So here's Brownson fighting Stonewall Jackson. And who is Stonewall Jackson? Who did he pick as his chief of staff? Well, he picked who the president of Princeton said was probably the best theologian in America, if not the world. He picks Robert Louis Dabney, who really didn't know anything about military. Of course, how did anybody in the South know anything about military? That war just started like out of the blue. In fact, how did that war start? Brownson goes into it in the speech. But Brownson leaves out another very interesting little note, and he could have brought it up because it says when he studied law, he studied in what I read, Daniel Webster law office. Webster would have died probably about 1850, so he must have been the law office soon after his death. But one time, Webster is talking to 3 senators from the South. Webster tells the senators, can you guys, fix this slavery problem that we have in the country? And the Southern senators said to Webster, well, we're working on it, we got it under control. And Webster says, that's not going to work. They really want to get rid of it up here. And so Webster says, you better get ready for weapons. Those are the words he used. You better get ready for weapons. 1850. And the senators were astonished, because they knew what he meant. They were like speechless. Like, what do you mean? Webster says, they're teaching the children in the public schools up here to hate slavery. They will be invading you. That was my paraphrase. The South had no public schools. And after the war, they were forced to have public schools as part of Reconstruction. And immediately Dabney then wrote many essays on the evil of public schools. He had like 6 little major chapters, each chapter in and of itself establishing that public schools is a very evil idea and only evil can come from it. And nobody has even come close. Nobody in the homeschool movement has come close to nailing down how evil the public school is compared to Dabney, in my opinion. One of the things he points out, he said, France had no public schools, but Prussia did. The crime rate in Prussia was 14 times higher. Of course, if you have your children raised by a single mother, the crime rate will be 14 times higher. Kids raised by a single mother. And then you send them to public school, another 14 times. And that's where we live. Single mothers with the kids in public school. And the Philippines is plagued by that. Okay, 58% of the children are born out of wedlock, and like in America, they give the children, well, I don't know, I can't say that here, but it seems like it's the mothers that end up with the children. And there was a study I just heard that the statistics on a child being raised by a single mother, which are off the charts, and then you compare the child that's raised by a single mother to 2 parents, night and day. But if a single father raises that child, he has the same statistics as 2 parents. That's why the judges used to always give the children to the father. But 60 years ago, they start giving it to the mother. And that's a problem. And that brings up, and hopefully I'm not going too scattered here, but the big issue right now in America is judicial tyranny. Of course, that was always suspected. I think the Federalist Papers versus the Anti-Federalist Papers. I think the Anti-Federalists said this is going to be judicial tyranny. It's not going to be three equal branches. The judicial will rule. And with the lawyers being allowed to function in all three branches, a lawyer is an officer of the court. He's in the judicial branch. But then, like before the Civil War, 80% of congressmen I read were lawyers. Now it's maybe 40%. Presidents, Biden, lawyer, Obama, lawyer. And this battle against Trump could be just simply the fact that Trump's not part of the lawyer cabal. But what do we have? Trump is commander-in-chief, and he's put in different people. He put in Pete Hegseth, or the fellow in charge of the Pentagon. There's a big controversy over him. He's been divorced many times, of course, all these guys now. And, of course, he believes in the rebuilding of the temple in Israel, so, you know, he's the Christian that's going to believe if you curse the Jews, you'll be cursed, and if you bless the Jews, you'll be blessed. So they had to get him in. Just like almost all radio and TV preachers have to be, or you're not going to get on the radio or the TV. You have to be fairly radically pro-Israel. But where do the lawyers fit into that? I can't tell you, but I can tell you this, that Trump wants, and the guy, the head of the Pentagon, which I think he has a lot of good points besides his flawed theology, that no transgenders can be in the military. Boom. That was why Trump got elected, because people hate this transgender craziness. Okay? Which has been storming ahead like crazy. So when I was at Notre Dame, by accident, really, I find myself majoring in psychology, because freshman year, they ask you, what classes do you want to take? And I said, well, I want these 5. And then they turn around and say, well, but you can't have those 5. You have to take these 5. Well, one was psychology. It was B.F. Skinner. And before you know it, I got all these credits for psychology. But I did know this, that in psychology, 1973, homosexuality was classified as a mental illness. And by some real trickery in the back room, which is almost literally true, they wiped that off the books. Nothing wrong with being homosexual. Apparently nothing wrong with being transgender. So they want to claim that transgenders in the military is perfectly fine scientifically. There's just nothing wrong with it. So when Trump gets rid of it, what happens? Well, you're going to get all these lawyers and judges who come from a super liberal training background, oftentimes. And I've been in the Notre Dame Law Library a lot. You get the impression they're amoral. They're not that moral. And they lust away. There's a lot of sexual immorality. And so we got, with Biden appointing and Obama appointing, we have some really strange judges. Now, I have a little experience. My dad's a lawyer, and one time he had a woman working for him, and then she became a judge. And I soon found out, when it was very rare back then, this is a long time ago, she was a lesbian. Well, is that a surprise? First of all, is it how feminine? It was very unusual to find a woman lawyer. And women lawyers are going to be a lot more fast-tracked on the lesbian path. Now, these are things that that if you want to keep a job, you're not allowed to say. But I'm past that. And truth has to be said. So what happens? Trump gives the order, no transgenders, and all these feminist, lesbian judges that are off the wall morally, that your grandmothers, your great-grandmothers wouldn't have the slightest doubt at all that these people were mentally ill to the max. They wouldn't have the slightest doubt. And we're being, by God's judgment, must be, we're being ruled by neurotypes. I mean, people that are mentally ill. And Brownson gets into it. That speech, which is a distillation of all the knowledge of Orestes Brownson, his dad, that he very close to apparently, and very knowledgeable of what his dad was teaching. He soaked that up, and he went further than his dad as far as I can see. But what was in the news just recently was this judge in the U.S. District, apparently Columbia. So, you know, if they're part of Washington, D.C., I mean, that place, and we have thought that, and the people I'm with in South Bend, we have thought that forever. Okay, 40 years we had organized groups that the main problem in America is Washington, D.C. It's a foreign entity. You go there, it's just foreign people to begin with. And it's so obvious they don't represent us at all. I don't know when they ever did. But you have some really strange decisions coming out of there and some really strange people. So who is this lady? U.S. District Judge Anna C. Rees, a Biden appointee, and the first openly lesbian federal judge in D.C., blocked the Trump administration's transgender troops ban on Tuesday night. That's just this Tuesday. In part, citing Hamilton, a Broadway musical beloved by liberals, to justify her decision. Okay, well, that's neither here nor there, but here's what she says. The court's opinion is long. She admits it's long, she says, but its premise is simple. In the self-evident truth that all people are created equal, all means all, nothing more, and certainly nothing less. The order reads, differing from the Declaration of Independence, which reads, all men are created equal. Okay, well, that's the commentary. I don't like this commentary. But we do know she says, the premise of where she's coming from is very simple. And it lies in one thing. This is where she's coming from in her decision. The self-evident truth that all people are created equal. All means all, nothing more, and certainly nothing less. That's what she said. Okay, now that fits in perfectly to Brownson. His speech is equality and democracy. And Brownson ought to know. I don't know if he fought at Gettysburg. Maybe he did. Chancellorsville. No, Chancellorsville was right before Gettysburg. And I totally believe if Stonewall Jackson had been there with Lee at Gettysburg, the South would have won. So Jackson's not there. And Brownson had just been put in Libby prison, captured at Chancellorsville. So at Gettysburg, we know, Lincoln later gives the Gettysburg Address. And he says, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth onto this continent a new nation, 1776, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Okay, so this judge takes that and really runs with it. And she has tons of truth behind her. Because when Lincoln said that, he was a Republican. And the Republicans, and I used to say this on the show, you know, I had a show called Faith of Our Southern Fathers, and sometimes I change the title, but for 2 hours a week for many, many, many years, I just dug into the mind of the South and researched and spent hours and hours at the Notre Dame Library researching things like this. So as is normal, what is popularly perceived today is just mostly all propaganda. So when the Republicans talk about the Democrats, it's propaganda. Oh, the Democrats, they're the home of the KKK and all that. Partly true. But they don't talk about who they are. Okay, so where I'm from, grew up, Wisconsin Dells, Tommy Thompson was the governor for 4 times. He comes from our area. And one time in the liberal Capital Times in Madison, Wisconsin, there was an editorial going after Tommy and the Republicans and reminding them of who they were. And, of course, it was mostly all true. The Republicans were communist. That's who they were. They were followers of Francis Fourier. My brother and sister went to Ripon, Wisconsin College, and it was in Ripon where the Republican Party started. Other people claim Jackson, Michigan, but it's probably Ripon. And why did it start in Ripon? Well, they had a communist, Fourierite community there, 1,400 members who tried to live the communist life. They were called phalanxes, associations, and the goal was to make wealth. The happiness comes from wealth. So they said, if we live together, we can make more money. Didn't work. It folded. And many of the members then formed the Republican Party. And the Republicans, of course, really haven't gone far from that. Their goal is, their agenda is pursue happiness by accumulating wealth. That's kind of what it's always been. That's the perception. But it was a communist idea. And they were backers of John Brown, who would go to the neighbors and just kill them if he thought they had pro-Southern thinking in Kansas. He'd go there and just kill them with his sons. Take a machete and chop them up. And he was funded by some of the Secret Six of the North. The lady who wrote Battle Hymn of the Republic, her husband was one of the Secret Six, and they were funding Brown to go into the huge federal arsenal in Harper's Ferry and get those guns and arm the blacks so the blacks could do their duty and kill their masters. This was the Republican position. Theodore Parker, one of the most famous preachers in Boston. His grandparents were high up militia at Lexington and Concord in the 1776 era. And Parker, the most famous preacher in Boston, one of the biggest churches, was Lincoln's favorite. It's Parker who said, "Of the people, by the people, for the people," in the Declaration of Independence. Lincoln took that because he read Parker and Paine, the 2 Ps, Thomas Paine, Thomas Parker, those who Lincoln liked. You do your own research. That's who he liked. Those were his beliefs. And Parker said, it's written down, that the black man had a duty in the name of freedom to kill his slave master. If that's what he had to do to get free. He had a duty to get free or his grandchildren would curse him. That's the spirit that rules many Americans in their notion of freedom. And the Southerners, being the Bible Belt, said, this doesn't quite line up with Scripture. This is not good. So we're going to go into the equality, because now equality is the false god, way beyond anything else. And it manifests here that the commander-in-chief of the military that has no authority to say no transgenders in the military, because you got 600 or so federal district judges who at any time can say, I don't approve. And they can stop everything. And this was feared. This was always feared. And this is what the Democrats have been doing. This is what Schumer has been doing. Well, nobody's looking, filling these positions with very mentally ill people. When I took my case to the Supreme Court, I had to go through the 7th Circuit, and we had to kind of study. I took some law classes that was not official, and they used to talk about Easter House or somebody on the Seventh Circuit, and literally he was mentally ill. He was gone. This is who we got, okay? Because the lawyers can do whatever they want. The cabal can do whatever they want. They can make that Constitution say anything they want it to say, and they do. So even though you try to put somebody on the court, okay, we have Amy Coney Barrett. We thought, oh, she's the most conservative. We had to get a woman. She's the best, the most conservative, and people cannot believe her thinking now. They cannot believe that they ended up with her. So you can't figure this judicial system out, but you can figure it out if you step back and you read people that are way beyond anybody that I know we have today. We do not have anybody like a Robert Louis Dabney. We do not have anybody like Henry Brownson. We just don't have minds like that. Be nice if you could find one, but they're not there. And this is the judgment of God. My people perish for lack of knowledge. There will be no prophet. There will be no priest. They are all sinners. They've all become, Jeremiah 23, everybody's become like Sodom. And we're just about to go over the cliff, and people think, well, maybe Trump can save us. Well, that may be the only hope. But Abraham Lincoln said a couple things right. A house divided cannot stand. So you got 47% of the people hate Trump with their whole being, so it would appear. And you got 50, let's give Trump 52%, are supporting him. But that could change at any moment. And you could get a Kamala Harris even in the 26 election, something could change. But you could get an opposite of a Donald Trump in. And you just can't be going back and forth like that. A house divided cannot stand. Are we a house divided? Like, totally? In 1776, we were actually a house divided. In the same house, you had loyalists and you had patriots. And it was really bad. That was an actual civil war. What we call 1871 a civil war, of course, is not a civil war, and that's the problem. All these terms are usually wrong and misleading. You had two different nations. You had states that formed a nation in the South and states that formed a nation in the North. And they were totally opposite. One was the Bible Belt, and the Bible's what they went by. It unified them. And in the North, Dabney, Thornwell especially. Thornwell came from the North. James Thornwell, one of their top theologians. Some people say he's better than Dabney. Thornwell came from the North. He says, what we're fighting in the North. He said this shortly before the war. We're fighting communists, atheists, red Republicans, black Republicans. And Lord Acton called the Civil War, American Civil War, the Second French Revolution. And we will get into that. Okay, reading Brownson, which I think this speech is super unusual for Notre Dame because Notre Dame now is the opposite. Orestes Brownson died maybe 1877, and his last 10 years, it seems like his passion was to fight this wicked theory of evolution. And Orestes Brownson says the main enemy of Christianity now is geology. And when I went to Notre Dame, they made me take the geology, and the priest taught me that I absolutely did come from a monkey, and the world is absolutely 4 billion years old. It's a scientific fact not to be disputed. And the class was huge, and they made us take it, and it was the whole year. And then while I'm taking that, they made me take B.F. Skinner psychology. So what's going on at Notre Dame? Well, it's a complete takeover. It's a complete takeover. That they're thoroughly indoctrinating you, preparing you for the communist mindset. Okay? Brownson doesn't use the word communist, did? The Southerners did. He just calls it democracy. Pure democracy, which is basically communist if you look at the general idea. Okay, so he writes, he speaks. The European revolutionists or liberals maintain that the aim of the statesman should be to make all as equal as possible in their possession, social condition, power, and influence. The means they propose to this end is democratic government, by which they understand the sovereignty of the people, universal suffrage, and eligibility. Okay, now, he's writing this in 1897. I noticed that he wrote a book called Faith and Science, which I'd love to get. And when he wrote that book, it's about the same time that John Zahm of Notre Dame wrote his famous book, Evolution and Dogma, and trying to establish that Aquinas and St. Augustine taught theistic evolution. That book was condemned by the Vatican. Notre Dame and Zahm promised that they would not go that direction again. They would take the book off. Zahm would not write about that again. But that book stayed at Notre Dame. It conquered Notre Dame and now theistic evolution has conquered the whole Catholic Church. And they have to admit that after Vatican II, in almost every school that has any kind of Catholic label, in Europe and America, I can't determine here in the Philippines, these children, universities, have been teaching evolution, theistic evolution, but evolution. The opposite position of the man who's buried at the Basilica, Orestes Brownson, considered one of the top two thinkers of the 19th century in America. So, is there a conflict here? Massive conflicts here, that if you don't sort them out and you live with two opposites in your head with this much cognitive dissonance, you will be reduced to a passive state and you will be, your manhood will be just stripped from you, because manhood requires clear truth. And when you go, like the Catholic Church position is, well, it doesn't really matter what you believe, evolution or creation. And you're going, well, let me just stop. But what did Jesus teach on that issue? Because that's the only question that really counts. What did Jesus and the apostles teach on, did God create the world in 6 days and rest on the seventh? Did the apostles believe that that was true? And did they believe that the 6 days were 6 24-hour days? Well, everybody I've talked to at Notre Dame, I've talked to some of the highest theologians at Notre Dame. I've had the class. I've talked to the dean of the graduate school. Well, what do they say? Well, of course Jesus and the apostles taught 6-day creation. They believed that. That's what they taught. And I go, but we don't teach that at all. And they go, of course not, because science has just proven Jesus wrong. They say that with a straight face. Now, they don't say that right up front. That's in the back room. You have to ask that question. You have to flush that out. But that's their position. Jesus absolutely taught 6-day creation with the apostles. And it's absolutely true that all the Catholic schools since Vatican II teach evolution. The world is billions of years old. And yet Jesus said in Mark chapter 10, verse 6, that from the beginning of creation, he made them male and female. From the beginning of creation, he made them male and female. Now, you would think a Catholic who, when Jesus said, "This is my body," and they take those words very serious, which they should. But when Jesus says, From the beginning of creation, he made them male and female. You would think they would take those words very serious. But no, they let science. No one knows what science is. Well, we do kind of know what it is. It's witchcraft. Because the National Academy of Science, which Notre Dame is really proud to be part of, really proud, started in 1862 by Lincoln to help develop weapons to win the war. Lincoln was super desperate. All that you read on the internet is that 93% of the members of the National Academy of Science, the most prestigious group of scientists out there in the world, they say, 93% are atheist. Once you get into the area of science, and when you have priests teaching evolution, when you have popes accepting evolution as a valid position, or maybe even teaching it, how do you reconcile Jesus with that? How do you reconcile the apostles with that? Well, you have to turn into some kind of weird person to reconcile it, because they are two opposites logically. Jesus was very clear in a lot of his statements that from the beginning of creation, Adam and Eve were created. On the sixth day, Adam was created. And he lived so long, we have the exact years that he lived, and that genealogy goes right up to Christ. So if that genealogy of Adam living 930 years is not true, then we don't know that Jesus lived, went into his ministry at about age 30 and died about age 33 to 36. Then we don't know that. Maybe Jesus was 300 years old. Well, how do you know? I mean, you're going to accept that he's about 33, but you're going to deny that Adam, which is the same genealogy chart, it's just one continuum. Well, I'm just saying, Henry Brownson stood on the shoulders of his dad, and I can't wait to read his book, Faith and Science, because he was writing his book about the same time John's on, and everybody's being captivated by the Darwinian evolutionary theory, which is astonishing. Well, it's not that astonishing. The strongest doctrine in the Bible, according to John Henry Hopkins, who is considered the greatest divine in the North, Bishop of Vermont, who later became Archbishop of the Episcopal Church, when he was writing about this, he says, the doctrine that the church had as far as heresies, the doctrine that was least disputed throughout the history of the church was the doctrine on the slave-master relationship. What the Bible said about the master, what the Bible said about the slave, and what it said about the legitimacy of and the righteousness of that relationship. That was the least attacked doctrine throughout the history of the church. Throughout the history of the church, marriage was attacked. Wrong to get married. All kinds of things were attacked. They could never attack the scripture on slavery, but it was finally, after 1900 and some years, it was finally attacked and declared evil. So the strongest doctrine is overturned by the Civil War. But at the same time, 1859, Darwin writes his book, and within a few years, it's overturning maybe a much more fundamental doctrine. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Everybody knows how he created it. It's in the Ten Commandments. It's the reason you worship on Sunday. It says, because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, you are to rest on the Sabbath. Why? Because God created the world in 6 days. Well, how long is the Sabbath? Is it not 24 hours? Yeah. How long were those 6 days? According to what Jesus and the apostles taught. That's all that matters. What did they teach on that? We don't care about anything else. There's nothing else to discuss. What did they teach? But for some reason, people are blown away because the political false gods and false theology just seems to win over the sheep like so fast, so easy. And that's the problem. So unless you have minds like Henry Brownson, truly educated, minds like Dabney, truly educated, not the false education that goes on in the government schools and at these universities. That is a false education, most all of it. There was a time where people did get actually educated. It's gone. And you now have these judges, and of course they all go to Harvard. You know, if you look up this Anna Reyes, they all go to Harvard, and she's not even an American, of course. She's from Uruguay. And all they put on the court are people who really his aim is to destroy America. Okay. But no one really knows what America is. And let's read Brownson here, and he's going to tell us. Okay. He's going to tell us. And you're not going to find this because the thinking, even though it looks impressive sometimes, is way too shallow. The truth is still hidden. Okay. These European liberals, revolutionaries, want to make everything equal. Brownson says, well, we have the sovereignty of the people and practically universal suffrage and eligibility. Have we found the quality that is spoken of realized, or even that there is with us a tendency toward its realization? Okay. Now Brownson will give his bias. We consider it bias. But he's no more biased than Dabney. No more bias. Lincoln was emphatic, you know, the black man could never be equal to the white man. I mean, Lincoln said that all the time. Okay. So 99, 98% of the people, or maybe not, maybe 90%, I don't know, agreed with Brownson here on the next two paragraphs. And don't forget, truth is what 51% of the people say it is. So how can you criticize these people if they're with the 51% and they're with 90%? Under democracy, truth is the majority. Period. There's no discussion. That's the truth. Trump won, so that's the case. So let's read this quick. You only got 10 minutes on this. I'll read through it. I don't want to miss any part of the speech. The Negro who was a slave is now recognized as a citizen with equal political and civil rights with his former owner and master. Is he the equal of the white man? Recognized as such in property, social position, influence, and respectability? Would you readily take a negress as a white woman for your wife if you were disposed to marry? No. You would prefer your own color, and you are right. You would not consent to let your daughter marry a great shining bull Negro, and she herself would recoil in horror from such a fate. Where then, outside of the political and social order, is the equality? Where there cannot be intermarriage without loss of caste, there is no social equality. It may, however, be said that we have hitherto seen the Negro as a wild savage in Africa, or as degraded by slavery, and the time since his emancipation is too short to enable us correctly to estimate his capabilities for the higher civilization. And the civil and political equality we have conferred on him is the first step towards his moral and social equality. This is to suppose that civil and political equality will, when once recognized and secured, operate naturally and inevitably to secure equality of property, of social position, and influence. If it were so, and the tendency in this country were to greater equality of wealth, position, and influence, we should be able to see some proofs of it by this time. Our fathers proclaimed that all men are created equal and made equality the basis of the state. That all men are created equal is not true in an absolute sense, but only in the sense that they are created equally men with equal natural rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, unless forfeited by crime. Okay, now I'm going to have to, on the next show, stop here and criticize Brownson on this. Now, unfortunately, here in the Philippines, we have dogs, chickens. They go crazy on us. So either bear with this or I'll have to stop and wait till them just quit barking. Okay. So Brownson buys the lie of Gettysburg Address that we have these equality is connected to well, we'll stop here and then just wait. Brownson writes, if it were so, and the tendency in this country were to greater equality of wealth, position, and influence, we should be able to see some proofs of it by this time. Our fathers proclaimed that all men are created equal and made equality the basis of the state. That all men are created equal is not true in an absolute sense, but only in the sense that they are created equally men, with equal natural rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, unless forfeited by crime. Now, what I'm going to do on the next show is to, one of the things I'm going to do is point out that Brownson is wrong here in my mind. There are no such thing as unalienable rights from God called life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I will not rely on my wisdom on that. I will rely on the Archbishop of the Episcopal Church, John Henry Hopkins, who destroys the Declaration of Independence as fundamentally lies. And he is the head of the Church of George Washington. So some of these guys didn't play. Now Brownson then goes on to what is the most essential point. So now his speech really starts. And in my mind, this is the beginning of his speech. He makes his main point, and it's the main point that nobody knows about and nobody talks about. I have mentioned it on the show several times. But he says, we have abolished rights of primogeniture and entails, and by our statutes of distribution, provided for the equal division among the heirs of the estate of everyone dying intestate, thus preventing the growth of an hereditary aristocracy and approaching equality. I will do a commentary on that later. He continues on in his speech. Whether this, which weakens the family and makes us a nation of individuals rather than a nation of families, is wise or unwise legislation, I will not now undertake to decide. I will only say that the ambition of transmitting to heirs a family name inherited from a long line of noble and distinguished ancestors on which one can look back with a just pride is a powerful incentive to honor and virtue. In our country, except in rare instances, the family expires when the father and husband dies. We as a people have no ancestors, no family traditions, no homestead that has remained in the same line for generations and around which cluster all the family associations and recollections. Now he's going to go on and talk a little bit more about primogeniture and entail, which is the right of the firstborn son, which you get from Deuteronomy 21. You get it all throughout the scripture. I guess maybe the most famous is Exodus and the 10 plagues, the last plague, which finally moved Pharaoh. The first 9 plagues didn't move him, but when God said, I'm going to destroy all the firstborn sons, the firstborn son was so valuable, was so esteemed normally throughout all of history, for all cultures, in all families, that when God threatened to take out the firstborn son, Pharaoh capitulated. But America, and Thomas Jefferson called it his greatest achievement, one of his greatest achievements. Now, Thomas Jefferson's dad was Peter Jefferson, and he gave Thomas Jefferson, because Thomas Jefferson was the oldest son, and at 14, his dad gave him 2/3 of his estate, 5,000 acres. Why? Because the oldest son generally got 2/3 of the inheritance. The Bible says double portion. However, it was often translated, and there's reasons why, that the oldest son got 2/3, and Thomas Jefferson did get 2/3 at age 14. He writes the Declaration of Independence at age 33. And right after he writes it, in a couple months, he says he did his greatest achievement. What did he do? He goes into the Virginia legislature, and he goes to destroy the idea of the right of the firstborn son. That now he says everything has to be equal, because he wrote, all men are created equal. That means equal distribution. That's what he really meant. And that was what the social revolution of America was. Because I've read that with the social revolution of 1776, it mesmerized, it hypnotized, it captured the American mind so that nobody would ever think of honoring their firstborn son like the Bible says you must. The father has no choice. The firstborn son belongs to God. God has commanded the firstborn son must get double inheritance, which in Jefferson time meant 2/3. We destroyed it. It's not in our consciousness. People don't even know what the word primogeniture and entail mean. And what did Brownson say? In America, when the father or the husband dies, the families expire. They no longer exist except in some rare cases. So this experiment of America, what is the experiment? At its essence, it's the experiment of destroying the right of the firstborn son, which all cultures have always honored, and proceeding on this notion of equality. But the problem is when the father dies, he's the king. There is no king. They claimed that when Adam died, it was a free-for-all. That's what they claimed. Their theologians claimed. All a lie. All a lie. All government derives its authority from Adam. When Adam died, it's pretty obvious that Seth was the oldest son at that point, and then it would have been very orderly. But now everything is chaos, and the lawyers take over, and we're in this mess. So I will continue the speech by Brownson on the next show, and I'll jump into John Henry Hopkins' critique on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.